Hello and welcome to our webinar today, Children in Canada Deserve Full Protection from Violence, a Call to Action. My name is Kate Butler and I'm the chair of the Canadian Coalition for the Rights of Children. We're thrilled to be joined by Dr. Joan Durrant from the University of Manitoba and Dr. Val Michaelson from Brock University. Over to you, Dr. Michaelson.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thanks to all of you who have joined us virtually. Beyond a presentation, our goal today is to offer a call to action that stems from our commitment that children in Canada deserve full protection from violence. So let's start with some context. The context is actually quite positive, at least where we're starting. We'll pick up our context in 1991 when Canada ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And by doing so, we committed to protecting children from all forms of violence. And we committed to reviewing all of our laws to ensure that they comply with the standards of the convention. So you can see that commitment outlined here in Article 19. We're committing ourselves to taking all appropriate legislative, administrative, social, and educational measures to protect children from all forms of physical or mental violence. More recently, Canada applied to become a Pathfinder country with the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. This was established by the United Nations in 2016, and in 2018, Canada was approved as one of these Pathfinder countries. So this is really an exciting step for Canada. So far, there are 30 Pathfinder countries, and they use what are called the Inspire 7 strategies for ending violence against children. I'm going to come back to these Inspire 7 strategies later in the presentation. So I just want to flag that for you here when I talk about the Inspire strategies towards the end. This is what I'm talking about. As a Pathfinder country, Canada is now committed to making a formal commitment to end all forms of violence against children, legally prohibiting violent punishment, and providing support to parents and caregivers. So that was in 2018. Moving ahead to 2021, today, the day we're doing this presentation, the website of Justice Canada states that all children in Canada are protected from all forms of violence through the criminal code. So it really appears that we have everything in place. We have a commitment to upholding children's rights to protection and a formal statement that we are fulfilling that commitment, and even concrete strategies to achieving that commitment. So this is looking pretty good from the outside, but is this actually the case of what's happening in Canada? And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Joan now to talk some more about the reality of violence against children in Canada today.
Thank you, Val, and thank you, Kate, for organizing this event today. So from what Val has set out here, it appears that Canada is positioned to be a leader in the global effort to end violence against children. But have we fulfilled this promise? That's the question that we're going to address in this next part of the presentation. I'm going to start with the government's claim that all children are protected from all forms of violence through the criminal code. The criminal code is divided into several sections, and one is called Protection of Persons in Authority. There are two laws in this section. One protects surgeons, and the other protects adults who are entrusted with the care of children. And that law is Section 43. It reads, every school teacher, parent, or person standing in the place of a parent is justified in using force by way of correction toward a pupil or child, as the case may be, who is under his care, if the force does not exceed what is reasonable under the circumstances. I'd like to call your attention to three words in this law that are very important to understanding how it contributes to violence against children. The first word is justified. In law, a justification means that it's the right thing to do. It's not just an excuse for bad behavior. It actually says you're doing the right thing when you use corrective force against a child. Another important word is correction. This law is about punishment. It's not about protecting children who run into traffic and pulling them back. It's not about putting children into car seats or dressing them or anything like that. It's about punishment, and it comes historically from a law that actually spoke to correcting what is evil in the child. That's where this law stems from. And the third important word is reasonable. Force that is considered to be reasonable under the circumstances is allowed. That word reasonable has led to many acquittals over the decades in cases where children were treated with horrific violence, whippings with cords, punching in the face, lifting children off the floor by their necks, tying them up, many breaking objects on their bodies. So in the 1990s, a constitutional challenge was initiated to demonstrate that this law violates the rights of children and to have it repealed. That challenge went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 2004, the Supreme Court ruled that actually Section 43 does not violate the rights of children. So they thought that they could resolve this and continue to protect persons in authority by defining what reasonable corporal punishment is. The court said that correction would be considered reasonable when, first of all, it's administered by a parent. They said that teachers could no longer use corporal punishment, but they didn't take teachers out of Section 43. So this is a messy area. The second criterion for reasonableness is that the child must be between the ages of 2 and 12 inclusive. So a child whose birthday turns 2 tomorrow cannot be hit today, but they can be hit tomorrow. And they can be hit until they turn 13. The third criterion is that the child must be capable of benefiting from the correction. But the court didn't set out who these children are who benefit from being hit and hurt by their parents. We have no idea who they are, and in fact, the research has never, ever identified such a group. Fourth, the force must be of a transitory and trifling nature. But again, that was not defined. They didn't use injury as a criterion, for example. They didn't specify how much force could be applied. They didn't specify how long the pain could last. They didn't specify how long a bruise or a welt could last. There was no definition of this at all. It's completely subjective. They also specified that reasonable force could not allow the use of objects or blows or slaps to the head. So, some of us celebrated this, that children could no longer be hit with objects, but they can still be hit with hands. And there is no evidence to suggest that children are any safer being hit with hands than they are being hit with objects. And also, although we can no longer hit children on the head, we can still hit them anywhere below the chin. The force used must not be degrading, inhuman, or harmful. There's plenty of evidence showing that it's harmful, and Val is going to speak to that shortly. And there has never been a group identified of any human beings that experiences being hit as non-degrading. Finally, they defined reasonable force as that does not stem from the caregiver's frustration, loss of temper, or abusive personality. We don't quite know what an abusive personality is, but we do know that parents can only hit and hurt their children if they're calm, cool, and collected. And this is the law of Canada today.
Thanks, Joan. We're going to talk now for a bit about why Canada's law is so problematic. This idea that corporal punishment is beneficial contradicts all scientific evidence, and it violates human rights standards. So I want to talk about these 2 points, one at a time. Let's start with the scientific evidence. While it might be tempting to say, I was spanked and I'm okay, the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that the odds were against you if you were spanked as a child. It doesn't necessarily mean you were harmed, but the risk was there. The odds were against you. In more than 100 studies, corporal punishment predicts solely negative outcomes. So let's have a look at some of these outcomes. It provides a model of aggressive problem solving. It creates resentment and hostility that can't be expressed by the child. It leads to fear of the parent rather than trust. It actually has a physical impact on brain architecture. It slows children's learning and cognitive development. It leads to mental health problems, including substance use, suicide ideation, depression, and anxiety. It conveys a message of worthlessness to the child that is carried throughout the life. It amplifies the risk of increasingly severe assault, and it increases the likelihood that the child will learn to submit to violence later in life or commit violence later in life. The evidence is absolutely overwhelming and unequivocal. Every time a caregiver hurts a child as a response to conflict, the child has also learned that hurting others is an appropriate way to respond to conflict. And so the child has lost an important opportunity to learn how to resolve conflict without violence. This is also about human rights. It might be tempting to say, I have the right to parent as I see fit, but corporal punishment violates children's most basic rights to physical security and dignity. These are rights that are protected in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I want to look more closely with you at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we're going to zoom in on General Comment 8. The United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child requires that all states, so all the governments that have ratified the convention, like Canada, are required to remove any laws that allow any degree of violence against children. Listen to this line from General Comment 8. The committee emphasizes that eliminating violent and humiliating punishment of children through law reform and other necessary measures is an immediate and unqualified obligation of states parties. It's worth noting that General Comment 8 was written to make it crystal clear that Article 19 of the CRC includes corporal punishment. Every 5 years, Canada is required to report to the Committee on the Rights of the Child to demonstrate its progress towards implementing the standards of the CRC. The CRC is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So far, Canada has submitted 3 reports. In response to each report, the committee has said that Canada must repeal Section 43. By 2012, the committee stated that it had become gravely concerned by Canada's lack of action around Section 43. So now I'm going to turn it back to Joan.
Now we're going to look at the question of where Canada stands internationally. Is Canada, relatively speaking, a leader on this issue, or are we falling behind? Well, the first interesting fact is that as of today, 62 other countries have prohibited all corporal punishment of children in all settings. That includes the home. These countries are in almost all regions of the world. 10 are in Central and South America, 35 are in Europe, and that's with the that does not include Scotland and Wales, because they're part of the UK. They don't count into the list of countries, but they have also prohibited all corporal punishment of children. One country in the Middle East and that is Israel, 10 in Africa, and 6 in the Asia Pacific region. So what are these laws about? Well, the first thing to know is that they are non-punitive. They were never intended to put people in jail or to apprehend children or anything of that type. What they are intended to do is to ensure that the country complies with the convention and other human rights instruments. In almost all cases, these explicit prohibitions are not in criminal codes, they're in civil codes, and their intention is educational. They're meant to raise awareness of the issue and to shift attitudes. And they are a sign of a shift in thinking about family violence that is more preventive, more proactive, and less reactive and punitive. So rather than saying it's okay to hit your child, and then that violence escalates to the point where there's a problem, and then we intervene, these laws say just don't hit them at all. And with that message, they prevent a huge amount of violence against children. So what do these laws look like? Well, I'm going to show you a few examples of these laws from different regions to just highlight how they compare with Canada's law. So let's just look again briefly at Section 43, which was codified in 1892, which is all about protection of the person in authority. Sweden became the first country to prohibit all corporal punishment of children in 1979. And their law is written from the perspective of the child. Children are entitled to care, security, and a good upbringing. They're to be treated with respect for their person and individuality and may not be subjected to physical punishment or other injurious or humiliating treatment. So some important pieces here are that this law is written from the standpoint of the child being a rights bearer. Second, they are deserving of respect, and physical punishment is classified as something that a child is subjected to, not something they benefit from, and it's classified with other injurious and humiliating treatment. So there's no claim that corporal punishment could ever not be degrading. I'll show you a few other laws that have been passed since then. Romania passed their law in 2004, and it clearly says disciplinary measures concerning the child can only be taken in accordance with the child's dignity, and under no circumstances are physical punishments allowed. Venezuela's law, passed in 2007, says that all children and young people have a right to be treated well. All forms of physical and humiliating punishment are prohibited. So you can see that these are not, these are very clear messages. It's very explicit that corporal punishment specifically is prohibited. The Republic of Congo prohibited all corporal punishment in 2010 with a simple statement: it's forbidden to use corporal punishment to discipline or correct the child. Mongolia in 2016 passed this law: children have the right to be protected from any forms of violence, physical punishment, psychological abuse, neglect, and exploitation in all social settings. This is just a sampling of the 62 laws, but they're all of them are written from the perspective of the child in need of protection, the child with a right to protection and dignity.
Thanks, Joan. I always love it when you show those laws side by side, because it really does draw attention to exactly what you just said, that the focus on Canada's law is on protecting the parent, and all of these other countries are focused on protecting the child. The next section that I want to talk about is what has been happening here in Canada while these other 62 countries have gone about changing their laws. I want to start this timeline in 1978. When the Federal Department of Justice recommends that Section 43 be done away with. and that the code should make it clear that an adult may not use physical force upon a child under any circumstance. This is even before Sweden prohibits all corporal punishment in 1979. And of course, Sweden is the first country to do that. But people in Canada and leadership were already thinking about this around that time. Moved to 1980. The Canadian Commission for the International Year of the Child states that Section 43 of the Criminal Code should be immediately examined in depth by the Minister of Justice with the object of eliminating discrimination against children. 1981, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health, Welfare, and Social Affairs states that Section 43 of the Criminal Code should be repealed immediately. Globally, over that decade, 3 more countries had prohibited the corporal punishment of children: Finland, Norway, and Austria, bringing the total now to 4. Now we're in 1991. The first private member's bill to repeal Section 43 is introduced in the House, and highly significant, Canada ratifies the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And so our commitment becomes even more robust. Or does it? In 1994, between 1994 and 1999, 7 repeal bills are introduced in the House or the Senate. Globally, 8 countries have now prohibited all corporal punishment of children, with Cyprus, Denmark, Latvia, and Croatia joining the others. By 2006, 17 countries had full prohibitions, but more were coming. In Canada during that time, 9 more repeal bills are introduced in the House or the Senate. When we were making these slides, we didn't even have room for the flags of what was happening to depict what was happening globally. Just go to the next slide and you'll see by 2014, a full 45 countries had prohibited all corporal punishment of children. Netherlands, Costa Rica, Kenya, South Sudan, Honduras, Brazil, and more. Meanwhile, in Canada, some more things are happening. In 2015, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action were issued, and the Prime Minister of Canada made a commitment to fully implement all the calls to action. Call to Action 6 is a call to the Government of Canada to repeal Section 43 of the Criminal Code. Also in 2015, Canada adopted the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which sets out 17 Sustainable Development Goals. One of these goals is to eliminate all forms of violence against children. And one measure of success will be the elimination of corporal punishment. It's that important that it's even used as an indicator. Meanwhile, in Canada, while this is going on, Benin, Ireland, and Peru joined the list of now 48 countries that now fully prohibit all corporal punishment of children. In 2017, then Senator Murray Sinclair, who was the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission from 2009 to 2015, takes this up. He reintroduces a repeal bill in the Senate. By now, 53 countries have fully prohibited all corporal punishment of children. We want to read you a little bit of the speech that the former senator made when he introduced his repeal bill. He said this: "Do we want to live in a country that does not prohibit, but only defines how we can assault children? I don't think so. Remember, we tell everyone with pride that this is a place that protects the vulnerable. We are the ones that must show leadership here, because if not us, then who? In 2018, Senator Sinclair's bill passes second reading in the Senate. With Nepal joining, we are now at 54 countries with full prohibitions. And in 2019, Senator Sinclair's bill dies on the order paper when a federal election is called. And 4 more countries fully prohibit all corporal punishment of children, bringing the global total to 58. By 2020, 650 professional organizations across Canada have called for repeal, and 3 more countries prohibit all corporal punishment. Today, in 2021, the Republic of Korea became the 62nd country to fully prohibit corporal punishment, and still, there is no action here in Canada. Today, 62 countries have fully prohibited corporal punishment in all settings, plus Scotland and Wales. 27 more countries have committed to doing so. Canada is not on either list. So why is it so hard to change the law in Canada? And I'm going to turn this back to Jo to share some ideas about this.
Thanks, Val. We've identified 3 barriers that we think have been key in creating obstacles to repealing Section 43 in Canada. One of them is the belief that we can end corporal punishment through public education, that we don't have to bring down the hard, tough arm of the law, that we can do this gently through public education. Actually, that is not borne out in the evidence. This is a question that was addressed in a multi-country study that was published in 2010. These researchers compared 5 countries that varied on whether they had prohibited physical punishment and whether they had done public education. The countries were Sweden, Germany, Austria, Spain, and France. So at the time of the study, which was 2007, Sweden and Germany had prohibited physical punishment and implemented public education campaigns. Austria had a prohibition, but no public education. Spain had done public education, but had not prohibited. And France had done neither. In each of these countries, the researchers interviewed a random sample of 1,000 parents about their attitudes and behaviors. I'm going to show you just one of their findings, but it's important to know that virtually all of their findings showed the same pattern. So I'll show you the percentage of parents who reported using physical punishment in each of these countries. First are the countries with prohibition and public education. And you can see that the percentage of parents who report using physical punishment was very low in those countries. The next is a country with only prohibition that had not implemented public education. The percentage is somewhat higher, but not by much. In the country that had only public education, but no law reform, the percentage of parents using physical punishment was much higher, 5 times higher than in the country with both. And in the country with neither prohibition nor public education, the percentage was very high. Virtually all parents were using physical punishment. So what this demonstrates, not just this one graph by itself, but virtually all of their findings on attitudes and beliefs and all kinds of measures of change, all showing the same pattern, is that prohibition is extremely important in this process. It's absolutely true that public education and parent support are essential to changing attitudes, norms, and behavior. And I spend a great deal of my time doing that very thing. But those changes cannot be fully achieved if the law contradicts them. A fundamental principle of effective public education is clear and consistent messaging. It's very difficult for caregivers to change their behavior when the expectations are unclear and, in fact, in our case, contradictory. And I want to note that Spain and France both prohibited all corporal punishment after that study was conducted. The second barrier that we've identified that stands in the way of change in Canada is the belief that parents will be criminalized for trivial offenses. New Zealand, which had a law identical to Canada's, was also concerned about this. So when they prohibited corporal punishment in 2007, the police agreed to monitor all of their calls to what were called smacking incidents, or what we would consider, acts against a child that would not warrant police intervention, but really parent support. So every 6 months, they recorded the number of such calls that they attended and the number that were prosecuted from 2007, when the ban was passed, until 2012. And I'll show you what they found. So the black line shows the number of smacking calls that police attended over those 5 years. So it never exceeded 25 in the entire country of New Zealand. The red line shows the number of cases that were prosecuted. And the highest number in any year was 3. And all the rest of the periods were 0 or 1. And those cases that were prosecuted ended up being more severe than just smacking. I'm going to let Val now address the third barrier to change in Canada. Oh, Val, you're muted. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. The third barrier we identified is that we can't impose our values on other cultures and religions. And we sometimes hear that Canada has such a large variety of cultural and religious commitment and expression that it's especially hard to prohibit corporal punishment here. I just don't think that argument has any merit at all. Joan, can you move down the slides? We see that around the globe, countries that reflect all the major world religions have found ways to protect children from corporal punishment. And so that we have a multicultural and multi-religious population is no excuse. Countries that are primarily Islamic, Roman Catholic, Buddhist, Jewish, Christian have all found ways to do this in their own contexts. In fact, religious leaders around the world are champions in terms of prohibiting corporal punishment. One example of this is from 2006, when a diverse group of religious leaders from around the world came together in Kyoto, Japan, to develop what is now called the Kyoto Declaration. They state, "We call upon our governments to adopt legislation to prohibit all forms of violence against children, including corporal punishment." And remember, these are imams and rabbis and priests and ministers and people from all different religious commitments. And they state, "Our religious communities are ready to serve as monitors of implementation, making use of national and international bodies to maintain accountability." Now, we are not naive. We know that different religions are used to support corporal punishment, and in Canada, Christianity is certainly one of them. Inspired by Christian interpretations of sacred texts, we often hear phrases like "spare the rod, spoil the child" in the context of this work, with the idea that it is a God-given responsibility for parents to use corporal punishment. This is my tradition. I know these arguments well. But many Christian and other religious leaders are champions of prohibiting corporal punishment. I know that right now during this webinar, the Executive Minister of Theological Leadership of the United Church of Canada, the Reverend Dr. John Young, is with us because he's so committed to a religious response to protecting children from violence, including the messages that Christianity has propagated over years. And I'm sure he's glad to talk to anybody at another time if you have questions about that. In cases where religious groups are not on board, it doesn't mean we just give up and say, oh, well, all the scientific evidence doesn't matter if it's someone's religion. I want to show you an approach that I really like I think is really effective in addressing this. It's from the INSPIRE strategy. You remember I told you that Canada is a pathfinder country for the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. That was one of our first slides. And I told you that as a pathfinder, we're committed to implementing the INSPIRE framework, which promotes these 7 strategies for ending violence against children. First, you'll note that the I stands for implementation and enforcement of laws. The framework specifies that this includes laws prohibiting corporal punishment. The N in INSPIRE stands for norms and values. The idea is to challenge norms and values that harm children, even if they are part of someone's culture or religion, and strengthen norms and values that support nonviolent, respectful, nurturing, positive, and gender equitable relationships. The INSPIRE strategy doesn't let us say, oh, well, that's your culture or religion, do what you want, but recognizes that changing attitudes and norms in society is a critical component of preventing violence against children. Listen to the INSPIRE rationale. Changing attitudes and norms in society is an important part of preventing violence against children. Doing so requires modifying deeply ingrained social and cultural norms and behaviors. In particular, the idea that some forms of violence are not only normal, but sometimes justifiable. There are all kinds of resources that can help with this, and we list some here. If you're interested in this part of this issue, I want to draw your attention to the UNICEF resource, Partnering with Religious Communities. It's excellent. And also the Church's Network for Nonviolence website, where many more resources are housed, including for all different religious commitments. So you can look at those. Some of the work that Joan and I have been doing over the last 5 or 6 years relates to changing religious norms and values that are harmful, particularly around normalized violence. In 2017, we hosted a gathering of Indigenous leaders, Christian clergy, church members, theologians, and other academics to discuss the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to repeal Section 43. A major theme that emerged from our discussion was the recognition that corporal punishment and Section 43 are legacies of colonialism that have caused tremendous damage to Indigenous families and whole communities, and to all children in Canada, and that Christian sacred texts have been used to normalize, justify, and rationalize violence against children over centuries. Our discussion culminated in a Christian theological statement in supporting repeal of Section 43, and it was endorsed by stakeholders from across Canada. Another outcome was a book that Joan and I co-edited containing the reflections of participants in that gathering, Decolonizing Discipline, after working with all of these religious leaders and theologians. What I've concluded is that corporal punishment is not only bad public health, it's not only bad for the health of children, it's not only a violation of children's rights, it's also bad religion. So now what? Given all the attempts to repeal Section 43, all the commitments made, the progress going on all around us, why is Canada so stuck? We are exasperated when we talk about this together. What are we missing? So many people have tried to move this forward with so much energy, commitment, scientific evidence, human rights, and legal arguments. We are exasperated, and we thought with this opportunity, knowing that there are some really thoughtful people here with us at this webinar who are really strategically positioned in different places in Canadian society. We thought you might have some really good ideas about what's missing and how we can move this forward, what we can do and what others can do to support the government to make this change. And we would actually really love to stop for about 15 minutes now and have a conversation and hear your thoughts on this. So we're going to stop screen sharing. And I think Kate is going to help us now in terms of letting people ask questions maybe in the chat or share your perspectives on what do we need to do to move this thing forward. Joan, do you want to add to that as we invite people to share with us? I hope somebody will.
I know that there are a lot of people in this group who are working in this field, who support families, who are working every day to try to end violence against children and are stymied by the message that our country gives that it's okay. And I'm sure that they have also felt the same frustration and exasperation and bewilderment at Canada's place in the world around with regard to this issue. So what we're hoping is that some of you will have suggestions for what we could do. I know that you are muted. I don't know if the host can unmute or if we should do it all through the chat box. I'll leave that to Kate and Hala.
Thanks. And we should tell them if they don't ask questions, they're going to listen to us talk about our exasperation for a few minutes.
Right.
Everyone, you
asked,
can also put your hand up if you want, and we can unmute you, or as Hala says, you can write your question in the chat. And I just want to note that we've put a few links in there that Joan and Val referred to as well, so that you should be able to click on those links at your leisure. And I believe
I'll tell you more about those in a bit. Yeah.
Oh, sure. And we do have a question from Ruth Miller. Have you met with the Minister of Justice or asked for a meeting?
Yeah, I actually, we've met with some of the Minister of Justice's senior advisors over the years and have asked for meetings with the minister, but have not been successful in that at this time. We would really like to work with the department and provide, I mean, we have a tremendous amount of information that we can provide. And I personally have been to many of the countries with prohibitions and spoken to governments and understand how those laws are implemented. And I would love to be able to provide input to the minister on this issue, because clearly if 62 countries can figure this out, I'm sure that we can.
Thanks. There's also a question from Kathy Vandergrift here about making Canada a no-hitting zone. Would that build broad public support?
That's a really interesting idea. In the United States, there's a very vigorous initiative to declare hospitals, first of all, no hitting zones because of the amount of hitting of children that goes on in hospitals. And also a district attorney has made his office a no hitting zone, and entire counties, as I understand it, have been made no hitting zones. In Canada, we would really like to see the entire country be a no hitting zone, to just have a clear standard for everyone, no matter where they live or where they happen to be standing at a particular moment, that we just don't hit children in Canada. So to make the entire country a no hitting zone would be fantastic. And the only way we can really bring that to fruition is to say that in the law, that's the case, that we can't say on the one hand, you can't hit children here, and on the other hand say, oh, but you can.
Thanks. There's some really great suggestions in the chat, so I'm just trying to figure out which ones to highlight. But there's questions around how we can use social media to really build awareness on this issue, and flipping the script and telling people how much tax dollars are being spent on recovery. I'm not sure if either of you have comments on either of those ideas.
Absolutely. There was an economic study conducted a number of years ago on the cost of child maltreatment in Canada, and it's in the billions. So we're talking not only about the human cost to children who grow up wounded and scarred and considering suicide because of the experiences that they had. As Cindy Blackstock has often said, when are we going to stop raising children who grow up to be adults who have to get over their childhood? This is a huge piece of that. And so as long as we are giving children the status that is lower than anybody else in the country until they turn 13, we're wounding them. And we're saying that our country stands for this and supports it and condones it and justifies it. But the economic cost is also huge. The hitting a child so easily becomes a punch, so easily becomes that child falling down the stairs, or a child being cut, or having to go to the hospital. A child who falls against a wall and hits his head could have a head injury, and these children end up in the hospital, and that costs a lot of money. There are prosecutions that arise because we don't stop it soon enough. There's child welfare intervention that comes about because we don't stop it soon enough in more supportive, preventive ways. The costs are immense, and because we keep thinking about hitting children as something that's just part of what you do to raise a child, and we should really think first about these adults, as opposed to all the harm that we're not only allowing but sanctioning. We could save a lot of money if that's our only interest, but much more importantly, we can help children learn how to resolve conflict without hurting other people. If we truly want to end gender-based violence in Canada, we have to raise girls who are not taught to submit to violence and boys who are not taught to inflict it. This is key to ending gender-based violence in Canada. If we want to end bullying, we have to teach children how to interact respectfully with people weaker than themselves. If we want to stop gang violence, we have to create homes where children feel they belong, where they feel loved and respected and accepted, not afraid, so that they seek out other places where they feel accepted. This is the key. This is the key to ending violence. It's the key to building peace in societies. And we keep sweeping it under the rug. We have to finally confront it as the massively important symbol that it is of how we think about children and how we think they should be raised as citizens of our country.
Joan, as you're talking, I'm watching, the chat is just lighting up with so many ideas. People who obviously are passionate, have thought about this deeply, have really important ideas. And one of the things we were hoping was that this wouldn't be about us being the experts here to go and solve this, but that it would be a call to action for all of us to say, we need to keep pushing this and keep pushing this. You know, when I came on board this with Joan 6-7 years ago, I thought, oh, this will take 6 months. It's so obvious. And Joan's been working on this for 30 years. And I know others like Corinne's Quest I saw in the chat have been working on this for decades. I hope we will be country 63. But if we're not, we'll try to, I hope we'll be country 64. We just need to keep pushing. And what can we collectively do? And maybe that will mean different people. I noticed somebody had an idea about social media. Maybe somebody here will say that's an idea to take and try to figure out a social media campaign. My experience is that problems often take multidimensional solutions. It's not just one thing. It's different people pulling and pushing in all different directions. So I'm hoping as these ideas come up in the chat, that you're all looking at them and that we can own this and keep pushing to move this forward for the sake of our children. Our children deserve this.
Someone has mentioned child protection legislation in the provinces, which is a very interesting approach that has been discussed. You may know that corporal punishment is not prohibited in all child protection legislation, and it's not prohibited for biological parents anywhere, because the criminal code supersedes. So we have a situation where a child in a province where corporal punishment in foster care is prohibited, which isn't the case in all provinces. Okay, let's say a child is born in that province and that their biological parents can hit them. If that hitting escalates to a point where they are put into foster care, the foster parents cannot hit them. If that child is subsequently returned or adopted, those new parents can start hitting them again. That's the kind of situation we have in Canada. That's how non-rights-based our approach to this issue is. We seem to think that telling biological parents that they can't hit children is some hugely frightening concept. But all of these countries, the whole world is shifting so fast and we're being left behind, and it's becoming an embarrassment on the world stage to not have done this. I also want to point out that in those 62 countries that have prohibitions, they already repealed their criminal defenses long ago. Sweden did that in 1957. Other countries never even had them. But every country with a prohibition got rid of its criminal defense and then made an explicit statement saying we value and respect children. So they've moved far beyond the point of repeal. We're still working on that. Oh, Kathy Lynn is here and she has said she's ready to talk about Corinne's quest. Can someone unmute her to talk
Sure.
about that initiative?
Sure, definitely. Hold on 2 seconds. Her name is Kathy.
Kathy Lynn, who I know has been working on this issue for decades. And I'll just say Corinne's quest is named after a lawyer, Corinne Robert Shaw, who dedicated decades of her life to trying to get this change made and was at it long before I was. Sadly, she passed away before she could see her efforts come to fruition. But Kathy has picked up her mantle and has formed Corinne's quest.
Am I on? I don't think
Yes,
so. Oh, am I? I can't hear me.
I can hear you. We can hear
Yeah,
you.
I mean, I'm seeing all these ideas and well, that was a great review of everything. And you're right, Joan, I go back to the same days as you, 30 years ago, through all of the incarnations. I think the important thing is that you and Valerie and the people that are working with you have done a fabulous job on the academic side, right? The research, the reasons, without that, we can't do anything. But what we really need to do now is become advocates. We need to learn how to do marketing, how to raise hell. My member of parliament says, Kathy, you have to make more noise. You have to make a lot of noise. And that's true, we do. But I think too that I'm seeing all these ideas. I think we have to, as a group, decide on what we're going to do and do it all together. I mean, we've got all these people on this call who all represent other people, and we could probably get things happening. Now, you know, we really know that what we'd like to do is able to find resources to recruit a really good marketer, a really good advocacy person, somebody who knows how to do government advocacy, how to take on the government. I've met the Minister of Justice, not the current one. I met Jody when she was Minister of Justice. She had no idea what I was talking about. She was hit as a kid. She did not see the problem, and we got nowhere with her. But we keep talking to people. We keep sending out news releases. We keep writing letters. We keep doing it. But you guys are right, and we're right. We're missing something that'll motivate. And I don't know what it is. It almost is as bad as if some child got really hurt and we could jump on it, but we don't want that to happen, you know?
Exactly.
So all I'm saying is we need to develop a marketing strategy. We have to become advocates, and I mean strong advocates, not, you know, we have to raise hell. We have to really get going on this, but we have to come up with a message that we're all using, and we have to use it all together. So there you go. Right now, what I'm doing is just writing letters, because what I do know is that nobody looks at emails, nobody answers their phones. but I think maybe a handwritten letter kind of gets people. So I just want to see us all get together and do it together with Koreans Quest and all of the other organizations and work together.
So
There
we
we
need
go.
to build a strong coalition and speak with one voice. I saw a message from Cheryl Milne, who is the lawyer who led the constitutional challenge to Section 43 in the 1990s, and in that culminated in the Supreme Court's most unfortunate decision, which they thought was tremendously progressive at the time. She's mentioned in the chat that perhaps it's time for another challenge because so much has changed since 2004. We have a pile of research that would take a lifetime to read through. We have amazingly rigorous research. We have 62 countries. We have all these examples, all these cases. So much has changed. Maybe it's time to launch another constitutional challenge. That's another strategy. Someone has said, step away from the fear and just do it. So the suggestion is that the government is fearful for some reason, fearful of backlash. I don't know what is to be so feared. When we look at what this government has done in terms of medical assistance in dying, and what we've done in terms of rights for same-sex couples, and what we've done on many other human rights fronts, and yet this one just languishes. It boggles the mind. Someone has said we definitely have to collaborate to consolidate the message. I've been talking about ACEs because they've coalesced others across the world. Yes, I think Tracy Afifi is in this group, and she has conducted studies demonstrating that spanking, what we call spanking, that everyday little, what we consider trivial stuff, actually predicts mental health issues later in life that qualify it as an adverse childhood experience. It meets all the criteria. We need to help people understand this, that this is not just it's like we used to say about bullying. Boys will be boys, kids will be kids. Now we realize the harm that it does, that's carried throughout a child's life. We need to help people understand that this is the same thing, and that where the bullying is learned is in the home when children themselves are bullied. Can representatives from other countries write letters? Good question. I think people who have experience in implementation could definitely speak to that experience. We're going to shortly tell you about some webinars coming up that I think everybody here should join. George Zimmerman, who's with the Presbyterian Church, says that he is advocating this spring on this issue, and that he, with Ron Ensom, another of our wonderful colleagues, has brought a congregation and the Ottawa Presbytery on board. And the next step will be the National Presbyterian Church. So that's an example of individuals from within communities doing advocacy that promotes change and raises awareness tremendously, and brings people to the point where they realize the importance of this issue. And we can start to dismantle all these myths that seem to stand in the way. We'd like to provide some resources for those who want to learn more. There are many wonderful resources out there, and a tremendous amount of information has been gathered and archived in different places. First of all, we'd like to call your attention to the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children and their efforts to raise awareness of this issue. There's going to be a webinar tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock Eastern Time that will address the global situation with regard to prohibition of corporal punishment of children. And then another on June 4th, also at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, that will focus on implementation of law reform in various countries. And there is the link to register, and I think that Kate can copy that into the chat box. This is another excellent resource for Canada. This initiative began in 2004, and since then, 650 professional organizations across the country have endorsed this document, which calls for the repeal of Section 43 and full protection for children from violence. And it can be found along with the list of endorsers and background information and articles and a lot of accompanying information on the website of Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. This site is called End Corporal Punishment. It was formerly known, some of you might know it, as the Global Initiative to End All Corporal Punishment of Children. This site archives research, public education campaign materials, and is the most accurate, up-to-date resource for learning about what's happening in every country of the world. So everything that is uploaded to this site is reliable and has been carefully fact-checked. This site, Val referred to briefly a little bit earlier, the Church's Network for Nonviolence. This is a wonderful resource for people working in faith communities. There are materials that can be used in worship services. There are many different documents that have been signed by religious leaders to try to move this issue forward. There are opportunities to get involved. We highly recommend this if you're working with faith communities, because they have many different materials that can be helpful in that work. And finally, I just want to call attention to this site, which is a not-for-profit organization that I lead. We coordinate training across Canada and in many other countries in a program that helps parents raise their children without any physical or emotional punishment. So you can visit our site if you want to learn more. And now I am happy to turn it over to Val to close the webinar.
Thanks, Joan. You know, as Joan and I were planning this presentation, we just reflected many times on how absolutely exasperated we are by the lack of action by Canada. And we said, in the end, it is not more evidence that's needed, but maybe it's some soul searching that needs to happen. We like to think of ourselves in Canada as human rights leaders, but are we really? And so with this in mind, we wanted to give one of our final words to Nelson Mandela, who writes, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children." We hope that you will join us using whatever platforms and opportunities you have to provide children in Canada and around the world with full protection from violence. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, Joan. Thank you very much, Val. And this recording will also be found on the website of the coalition. So that's rightsofchildren.ca. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.